My daughter-in-law, Serafina, laughed like a hyena when the lawyer announced I'd only inherited an old painting. My son, Ethan, got the $3 million construction company, and I got what looked like a garage sale reject. That laugh told me exactly what 46 years of marriage had been worth to my late husband, Arthur. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how we got to this delicious moment. It was February 15th, exactly 1 month after Arthur's funeral, and we were sitting in Mr. Jennings's law office like something out of a bad movie. You know the scene. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, and enough tension to power a small city. Eleanor Sterling, Mr. Jennings read from Arthur's will, shall inherit the oil painting titled Sunset over Lake Michigan, currently hanging in the master bedroom. He paused, probably expecting some reaction from me. I just sat there, hands folded, while Serafina practically vibrated with glee beside Ethan. And to my beloved son, Ethan Sterling, the lawyer continued, I leave Sterling Construction Company, including all assets, properties, and business interests valued at approximately $3.2 million. That's when Serafina lost it. She actually clapped her hands together like a child on Christmas morning. Well, she said, turning to me with those cold blue eyes. Guess you were just a useless old wife after all. Her smile was sharper than broken glass. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. My own son, sitting there like a bump on a log, while his wife insulted the woman who'd raised him. The woman who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college after Arthur's first business failed. I looked at that smug little face and smiled back. How interesting, I said calmly. Oh, if only I'd known then what I was about to discover. That ugly little painting was going to give me everything I needed to wipe that grin right off her perfectly made-up face. Mr. Jennings cleared his throat. There are a few more provisions, but those are the major bequests. He handed me a key. This is for the safe deposit box containing the painting and some personal items your husband wanted you to have. As we left the office, Serafina was already on her phone, probably calling her mother to share the good news. Ethan walked beside me in silence until we reached our cars. Mom, he started, but I held up my hand. Don't, Ethan, just don't. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing there looking guilty, but not guilty enough to actually do anything about it. Little did any of us know that Arthur had left me the most valuable thing of all. He just hadn't realized it himself. The painting was even uglier than I remembered, if that was possible. I'd picked it up from the bank that afternoon and was now standing in my living room holding what looked like a toddler's first attempt at a sunset. Arthur had always claimed it was painted by some local artist in the 1970s, but honestly, I'd seen more artistic talent in kindergarten finger paintings. 3 days had passed since the will reading, and I was still processing Serafina's charming assessment of my 46-year marriage. Useless old wife. The words kept echoing in my head like a bad song you can't shake. I decided to hang the monstrosity in my bedroom, mainly because that's where Arthur had always kept it, and partly because I figured if I was going to be haunted by his final gift, it might as well be somewhere private where I could glare at it in peace. The painting was heavier than I expected as I struggled to position it on the wall hook. One corner slipped from my grasp and knocked against the bedroom dresser. That's when I heard it. A soft rustling sound like paper moving inside the frame. Curious now, I laid the painting face down on my bed and examined the back. The frame was old, held together with small metal clips that had loosened over the years. One corner of the brown paper backing had come loose, curling up slightly. My heart started beating faster. Arthur had been secretive about this painting, almost protective of it. I'd always assumed it held some sentimental value I didn't understand. Maybe there was something more to it after all. I carefully peeled back more of the paper backing. Sure enough, there was something tucked between the canvas and the frame. My fingers found the edge of what felt like a photograph. I worked it loose gently, not wanting to damage whatever it was. When I finally pulled it free and turned it over, my blood ran cold. It was a photograph of a woman in a hotel room. A woman I recognized immediately, though she looked younger, maybe 5 or 6 years younger. She was partially undressed, laughing at something the camera couldn't capture. Her hair tousled like she'd just gotten out of bed. The woman was Serafina. But here's the thing that made my hand shake as I stared at that picture. This photo had to be at least 6 years old based on her appearance. Ethan and Serafina had only been married for 7 years. I sank down onto my bed, still holding the photograph. Arthur must have known about this. But why had he hidden it? Why hadn't he told Ethan? And more importantly, who had taken this picture? That's when I noticed something else. In the background of the photo, barely visible on the nightstand, was a man's watch. An expensive one with a distinctive gold band. I knew that watch. I'd seen it recently. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling. That photograph burning a hole in my nightstand drawer where I'd hidden it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Serafina's mocking face from the lawyer's office. Heard her calling me a useless old wife. Well, wouldn't she be surprised to know this useless old wife had stumbled onto something very interesting indeed. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know more about when this photo was taken and who took it. More importantly, I needed to figure out why Arthur had hidden it instead of exposing his daughter-in-law's infidelity. I started with what I knew. The photograph looked professional, not like a casual snapshot. The hotel room was upscale. Egyptian cotton sheets, expensive furniture visible in the background, and that watch on the nightstand was definitely the key to everything. Around 10 o'clock, I drove to Ethan's office. Sterling Construction was busy as always, inherited success, humming along nicely. Ethan was in a meeting, but I waited, sipping coffee and observing his employees. Funny how different people looked at you when you weren't the boss's mother anymore. Just the boss's mother who got the leftovers. Mom, Ethan said when he finally appeared, looking harried. This is a surprise. Everything okay? Just wanted to see how you're settling into your father's office. I lied smoothly. What I really wanted was to get a better look at his desk, his personal items. See if anything jogged my memory about that watch. He showed me around, proud as a peacock. Arthur's office hadn't changed much. Same heavy desk, same leather chairs, same family photos lined up like little soldiers. That's when I spotted it sitting in a small dish beside his computer monitor. The watch from the photograph. That's a beautiful watch. I commented casually. New? Ethan glanced over and shrugged. Dad's old watch. I've been meaning to get it fixed. The band's been loose for years. Actually, it went missing for a while a few years back. Turned up in the weirdest place. My pulse quickened. Oh, where was that? Serafina found it at some hotel when we were there for a wedding. Must have fallen off during dinner or something. Lucky she spotted it, right? Lucky indeed. I smiled and nodded, filing away every word. So, Serafina had been at a hotel with Arthur's watch. A watch that ended up photographed in a hotel room with her in a state of undress. The pieces were starting to fit together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. After leaving Ethan's office, I drove straight to the downtown area. There were 3 upscale hotels within walking distance of where that wedding would have been held. If I was right about what I suspected, someone was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. But first, I needed to do some research and maybe make a few phone calls. The Grandview Hotel on Michigan Avenue had exactly the kind of upscale rooms I'd seen in that photograph. I knew because I'd spent the afternoon playing tourist, asking for a tour of their amenities for my upcoming anniversary celebration. The lie came surprisingly easily. Our suites all feature Italian marble bathrooms and Egyptian cotton linens, the overeager sales manager had gushed, leading me through a room that looked remarkably similar to the background in Serafina's photo. But it was the hotel bar where I hit gold. Mrs. Sterling, the bartender, a friendly man named Leo, recognized me immediately. Haven't seen you in ages. How's Mr. Arthur doing? My heart sank a little. Leo obviously hadn't heard about the funeral. He passed away last month, Leo. Oh no, I'm so sorry. He was a good man. Used to come in here regular like especially these past few years. Leo wiped down a glass thoughtfully. Always with that pretty young blonde. Your daughter-in-law, right, Serafina? The room seemed to tilt. They came here together often? Oh yes, every few months or so. Usually Thursday afternoons. Mr. Arthur always ordered the same thing. Whiskey neat, and she liked those fancy martinis with the olives. Leo paused, studying my face. You didn't know? I managed to keep my voice steady. Arthur mentioned it. I just wasn't sure which hotel. But Leo was already backtracking, probably sensing he'd said too much. I mean, it was probably business meetings, right? Your husband was always talking about expanding the company. Business meetings, right? The kind where your daughter-in-law poses for intimate photographs in hotel suites. I ordered a glass of wine I didn't want and sat at the bar processing this information. Arthur and Serafina had been meeting regularly at this hotel for years. The photograph proved their relationship had crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. But why hide the evidence instead of exposing her? Then it hit me like a freight train. Arthur hadn't hidden that photograph to protect Serafina. He'd hidden it to protect Ethan. My husband had discovered his daughter-in-law's betrayal, and instead of destroying his son's marriage, he'd kept the secret and lived with the knowledge that the woman Ethan loved was a fraud. But there was still something that didn't add up. That photograph showed Serafina with someone, but I'd only seen Arthur's watch in the background. Where was the rest of the evidence? Who had taken the picture? I paid for my wine and walked to the hotel lobby, studying the layout. There had to be security cameras, employee records, something that could give me more pieces of this puzzle. As I stood there, lost in thought, I felt someone tap my shoulder. Eleanor. Eleanor Sterling. I turned to find a man in an expensive suit smiling at me. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him immediately. I'm sorry, I said. Do we know each other? His smile faltered slightly. Julian Davies. I was a friend of your husband's. I heard about Arthur's passing. My condolences. Julian Davies. Why did that name ring a bell? Then I remembered he'd sent flowers to the funeral. The card had simply said with sympathy. J. Davies. Thank you, I said carefully. How did you know, Arthur? Business associates, he said quickly. We worked together on several projects over the years. He glanced around the hotel lobby nervously. Interesting place to run into you, actually. Arthur and I used to meet here sometimes. My radar was pinging like crazy now. Really? When was the last time you saw him? Julian's eyes darted away. Oh, months ago. Well, before he got sick. He was already backing away. I should let you go again. My condolences. He disappeared into the elevator before I could ask another question, leaving me standing in the lobby with more questions than answers. But I had a name now, Julian Davies. And something told me he was the final piece of this sordid puzzle. Finding Julian Davies turned out to be easier than I expected, though it took more patience than I'd anticipated. My neighbor Helen had connections at the country club. 40 years of marriage to a prominent lawyer had given her quite the network. Julian Davies, Helen had mused over coffee, runs an investment firm downtown. His wife Rebecca plays bridge with my sister. Why do you ask? I'd made up some story about potential financial advice, and within 2 days, Helen had arranged for me to accidentally bump into Julian at the monthly charity luncheon at the Grandview Hotel. Sometimes the best surveillance comes disguised as social events. Julian looked nervous the moment Helen introduced us, though he tried to hide it behind a charming smile. Mrs. Sterling, he said, shaking my hand with what felt like sweaty palms. My condolences on Arthur's passing. He was a good man. Thank you, I replied, studying his face. You knew him well. Business acquaintances, he said quickly, then excused himself to get a drink. I followed at a discreet distance and positioned myself at a nearby table where I could observe him. The man was definitely on edge, checking his phone constantly, drinking faster than was polite at a charity event. When he stepped outside to take a call, I saw my opportunity. I moved close enough to overhear, pretending to admire the hotel's garden. Told you not to call me here, he was saying in a harsh whisper. Eleanor Sterling is at the same event. No, I don't think she knows anything, but we can't be careful enough. The timeline got screwed up when Arthur died early. We were supposed to have another month. Timeline got screwed up. Another month. The pieces were starting to click. I retreated before he finished his call, but I'd heard enough. Julian Davies was definitely connected to whatever Arthur had discovered, and Arthur's death had disrupted some kind of plan. Later that afternoon, I called Helen back. That Julian Davies seemed nice, I said casually. Has he lived in Chicago long? Oh, yes, 4 years. Though Rebecca mentioned something about them possibly relocating soon. Business opportunities elsewhere, she said. Why? Just curious. But inside, alarm bells were ringing. If Julian was planning to leave town, it wasn't for business opportunities. It was because he was running from something. That evening, I sat in my living room with the photographs spread out on the coffee table, trying to piece together what I knew. Arthur had discovered something about Serafina and Julian. Julian was planning to leave Chicago. Arthur's death had disrupted their timeline. But what had Arthur found, and why hadn't he told Ethan immediately? I picked up the photograph again, studying it more carefully. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. A reflection in the mirror behind Serafina. It was blurry, but there was definitely someone else in that hotel room. Someone holding a camera. My blood chilled as the full implications hit me. This wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of something much more calculated. And Arthur had died before he could expose whatever scheme Julian and Serafina had been planning. But Arthur had been cleverer than they knew. He'd hidden this evidence where only I would find it, trusting that I'd eventually put the pieces together. Well, Arthur, I thought, carefully placing the photograph back in its hiding place. This useless old wife is about to finish what you started. I spent the weekend planning my approach like a general preparing for war. By Monday morning, I had photocopies of the picture, a detailed timeline of what I'd observed, and a plan that would give Serafina exactly one chance to tell me the truth. But first, I needed to understand what Arthur had really discovered. Monday afternoon, I drove to Sterling Construction. Ethan was in a meeting, but I wasn't there to see him. I was there to see Martha Miller, Arthur's longtime secretary, who'd stayed on to help with the transition. Mrs. Sterling. Martha's face lit up when she saw me. How lovely to see you. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Martha, I was wondering if you could help me with something. In the months before Arthur died, did he seem troubled about anything? Martha's expression grew thoughtful. Well, now that you mention it, he did seem worried about something. He was working late more often, making calls he didn't want overheard. And about 2 months before he passed, he had me set up a meeting with that lawyer, Mr. Jennings. 2 months ago. That timeline was crucial. Yes. And he was very specific about keeping it confidential, even from Ethan. Martha lowered her voice. Between you and me, Mrs. Sterling, I think he was suspicious about some of the contracts we'd been losing, big projects that should have been easy wins for us. My heart started racing. Did he say anything specific? He mentioned that someone might be feeding information to competitors. He'd started keeping certain bid documents in his personal safe instead of the shared files. Martha glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard, and he'd been asking questions about Serafina's access to Ethan's computer. There it was, confirmation that Arthur had suspected the corporate espionage. Martha, did Arthur ever mention Julian Davies? Her face darkened immediately. That snake. Yes, Mr. Arthur was very interested in Davies' investments lately. He'd had me pull all the contracts we'd lost in the past year, and wouldn't you know it, Julian's clients had won most of them. I thanked Martha and left. My suspicions fully confirmed. Arthur had been building a case against Julian Davies and by extension against Serafina, but he died before he could act on it. That evening, I made the call I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Serafina, it's Eleanor. I was wondering if you could come by tomorrow afternoon. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Oh. Serafina's voice was carefully neutral. Of course. Is everything all right? We'll talk tomorrow, I said, and hung up. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. Tuesday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Serafina showed up precisely on time, looking elegant in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly salary. Eleanor, she said, air-kissing my cheek. You sounded mysterious on the phone. I hope nothing's wrong. Please sit down, I gestured to the living room. Can I get you some tea? That would be lovely. I made tea I didn't want for a woman I was about to destroy. Taking my time to let anticipation build. When I returned with the tray, Serafina was sitting primly on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "So," she said with that practiced smile, "what did you want to discuss?" I set down the tea tray and picked up the manila envelope I'd prepared. "Actually, Serafina, I think you know exactly what this is about." I pulled out the photograph and placed it on the coffee table between us. The change in her expression was instantaneous and complete. The polite mask vanished, replaced by something between fear and fury. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "From my inheritance," I said calmly. That ugly painting turned out to be worth more than any of us realized. Serafina stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at me with calculating eyes. "What do you want?" I spent the weekend planning my approach like a general preparing for war. By Monday morning, I had copies of everything. The photograph, Julian Davies's business records, showing suspicious financial transactions, even Leo, the bartender's statement about the regular Thursday meetings. I'd been busy. Serafina was at her yoga class when I arrived at Ethan's house. I let myself in with the key I'd kept since they moved in. The same key they'd never bothered to ask for back. Funny how people forget about the little details when they're busy counting their inheritance. I settled into their expensive leather sofa, the one they'd bought with money from Sterling Construction, and waited. She walked in at 10:30, still glowing from her workout, yoga mat tucked under her arm. The sight of me sitting in her living room stopped her dead in her tracks. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I still have a key," I said pleasantly. "We need to talk, Serafina." Something in my tone must have warned her because she set down her yoga mat carefully and crossed her arms. "If this is about what I said at the lawyer's office, I think you're overreacting." "Oh, this isn't about that at all." I pulled out the photograph and placed it on the coffee table between us. "This is about your extracurricular activities." Serafina stared at the picture for a full 10 seconds before her face went completely white. "Where did you get that?" "From my inheritance." Turns out that ugly painting was more valuable than any of us realized. I leaned back comfortably. "Arthur knew all about you and Julian Davies. Dear, the affair, the business espionage, the Thursday afternoon hotel meetings, everything." "You don't understand," Serafina said, sinking into a chair across from me. "Julian and I. It's complicated. Corporate espionage usually is." I pulled out another document, Julian's confession, which I'd recorded on my phone and had transcribed. "He told me everything. Serafina, how you've been feeding him Sterling Construction's confidential information, helping him undercut Ethan's bids, sabotaging your own husband's business." Serafina's composure cracked completely. "Arthur's dead. That investigation died with him." "Oh, sweetie," I said, and for the first time let my real feelings show in my voice. "You really think I'm just some useless old wife, don't you?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. A number I dialed but hadn't connected yet. One button push and I'm calling Ethan. Another call goes to the police. A third goes to the Chicago Tribune business section. They love a good corporate espionage story. I set the phone down carefully. "Or we can discuss this like civilized people." Serafina stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Gone was the dismissive contempt, replaced by something that looked almost like respect and definitely fear. "What do you want?" she whispered. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Well, since you asked so nicely, let me tell you exactly what's going to happen next. The really delicious part was just beginning." "Here's what's going to happen," I said, settling back into that overpriced sofa. "You're going to tell Ethan everything. The affair, the stolen business information, all of it. And then you're going to figure out how to compensate Sterling Construction for every contract you helped steal." Serafina's mouth fell open. "I can't do that. He'll divorce me." "Probably." I shrugged like we were discussing the weather. "Should have thought of that before you decided to betray him." She stood up suddenly, pacing to the window. "You don't understand what it was like being married to Ethan. He's so predictable. Julian made me feel alive again." "How romantic." "I'm sure that'll comfort you when you're explaining corporate espionage to the authorities." I checked my watch. "You have until tomorrow to decide how you want to handle this, the easy way or the way that involves police." She spun around and I saw a flash of the calculating woman who'd been manipulating my family for years. What if I refuse? What if I call your bluff? Try me. The words came out colder than I intended. I buried a husband last month, discovered my son inherited millions while I got table scraps, and learned my daughter-in-law